Greetings, brothers and sisters. So yesterday I started a second video, and I couldn't finish it time-wise. So I'm putting this in here because it's sort of the big story today. So I'm going to lead with this. Fauci's in trouble. Dr. Anthony Fauci books scrubbed from Amazon, Barnes & Noble after premature posts. This has to do with his emails. Look over here. They're advertising Why Women Kill from the creator of Desperate Housewives. They were desperate before, but now they're murderers. Why Women Kill. Let's do a sort of funny show about that. Dr. Anthony Fauci book scrubbed from Amazon after email dump. Fauci's forthcoming book seemingly scrubbed from Amazon and Barnes & Noble's after backlash. And so this is not good for him, no matter what the media is saying. You know, I saw him briefly on MSNBC yesterday, and Marsha Wallace, who used to be a Republican, now has a show, really horrible show on MSNBC. And she had Fauci on, and I didn't watch the whole interview, but it didn't seem like she asked him one question about the emails. But then she said, you were put under so much pressure. The one time you said, it's been 4 days since I've had a press conference. Can you tell me how much pressure was put on you to dispel all the disinformation from the last administration? She literally was asking him that as this email drop story was exploding. She was crapping on Trump, and she was putting Fauci on a pedestal. And so this is from the New York Post, which obviously isn't going to be not covering this. They love this kind of stuff. Republican lawmakers blast Fauci after thousands of emails released. GOP lawmakers lashed out at White House Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci Wednesday after a bevy of his emails from earlier days of coronavirus pandemic were made public. So one of the emails said that the virus may have been engineered, emails show, and that he covered it up. He was pressured to cover it up and downplay it and downplay the Wuhan, China stuff. And think about this because, this is the guy that everybody was supposed to trust. I talked about this in a video on my other channel yesterday. Like everybody used him as the authority. Oh, Fauci says, right? You can trust Dr. Fauci. Fauci only speaks the truth. And he covered up for Wuhan. I mean, he did disinformation for Wuhan. That's what's coming out with these emails. And so, like if you can't trust Fauci, who can you trust? And what he said was, the unusual features of the virus make up a really small part of the genome. So one has to look really closely at all the sequences to see that some of the features potentially look engineered. Having had COVID, I could say it's not like some natural disease that you have. It's a weird thing to have. I mean, people are losing their sense of smell and taste. Kids are getting purple toes. And just that. Like just purple toes, nothing else, no other symptoms. It's vascular. It affects the vascular system, the heart, but also your lungs. I mean, it's just a weird thing. It lingers on. Some people get it and never, they never are able to shake it off, right? They're these long haulers. I mean, it's just a weird disease. And what it does to your body afterwards in terms of your immune system, and it ravaged my system. I got all this blood work done. It was a nightmare. And I said all along, it seems like it's something, genetically engineered. And they all knew it, right? If Fauci knew it, all these people knew it. It wasn't just Fauci. Like everyone knew this was a biological weapon. It had been released. And now they're blaming it on China, but everyone went along with it knowing that, they didn't come out and say. And this is why Trump was saying this stuff, because everybody knew, right? I mean, think about how it affected everybody in the world. Shutdown. It's a global catastrophe economically in so many other ways. Kids are starving at a higher rate because of, the global shutdowns and all this stuff. And he's saying here that it was a biological weapon. And you can say it was accidentally leaked. It doesn't make any difference, but what if it was intentionally put out there? And it was an agreed upon move? not just, from one country. And so that's what it seems like. And Fauci has been lying to people. Like, you can't trust Fauci. Who can you trust? And then Fauci emails show his flip-flopping on wearing masks to fight COVID. On February 4th of 2020, one of his friends writes to him, "Tony, I'm traveling to somewhere," redacted. "Folks are just suggesting I take a mask to the airport." And then he responds to this person. "Masks are really for infected people to prevent them from spreading infection to people who are not infected, rather than protecting unaffected people from acquiring infection. The typical mask you buy at the drugstore is not really effective in keeping out virus, which is small enough to pass through the material. It might, however, provide some slight benefit in keeping out gross droplets. If someone coughs or sneezes on you, I do not recommend that you wear a mask, partially since you are going to a very low-risk location." And so, this is early on. There's a fact-checking place that says, political fact, that this was, a deceptive post. A social media post using old Fauci email falsely claims that Fauci lied about mask wearing. And so their point is that he changed his position. The problem with it is, if we go to the CDC website here, which I've showed you over and over again, this was updated on March 1st of this year, so it's not outdated. And what the CDC says, individuals who are in close contact within 6 feet for a total of 15 minutes or more. And a person with COVID who has symptoms, this is exposure to. So if you're exposed to a person who has symptoms, or a person who is tested positive and has confirmed to be tested positive, and you're within 6 feet for a total of 15 minutes or more, you're considered a high risk to have COVID. And it says here, this is irrespective of whether the person with COVID or the contact was wearing a mask, or whether the contact was wearing respiratory personal protective equipment. So if you were wearing even the best masks, not just these crappy store-bought masks, right? If you were wearing these things and you were in contact with somebody who either has COVID or shows symptoms of COVID, you're considered a high risk. And you should stay at home for 14 days in quarantine. And so, irrespective of whether you're wearing a mask or not, means that the mask doesn't prevent somebody from giving it to you, and it doesn't prevent you from getting it. And so, what? And then Fauci said this back in February. And so their, whole mask thing. And now Fauci is coming out and, these emails are showing him to be a liar, a weasel, right? So much so that his new book is being pulled because, he's been discredited already. And this thing's just going to get worse, right? And what is the mainstream media then? They had 3 heroes during the COVID. They had Fauci, they had Cuomo's, and they had Bill Gates. Bill Gates and Cuomo's have already been discredited, and now Fauci. So, who was telling the truth, right? And now you have all these people wearing masks like they're going to wear masks for years. They think it's like a safety blanket. But in reality, it didn't do anything to prevent you from getting COVID. The way not to get COVID is not be within 6 feet for 15 minutes with a person who has it. That's what the CDC official website says. And so, again, and this fact checker doesn't include that, And so they're just, this is bad. This guy's a liar. He's a weasel. He deceived the American people. I mean, his emails are exposing this. His private conversations don't match his public rhetoric. And his public rhetoric, is something that doesn't even match the CDC website. And so, again, this is about the media. This is about the beast, the system. It's about all of it, right? See, let's go back to this. Let's go back to trusting the science.
It's science! And you shut up and wear your mask. It's science! And you shut up and wear your mask. It's science! And you shut up and wear your mask.
So what they've been saying to us over and over again, to do with COVID and any of the recommendations coming from Fauci and the CDC, is trust the science. And this is the religion of science. I've talked about this. Because, I trust science for the most part. There's a higher level, which is spirituality. There's spiritual science. But in terms of, physical science, material science, I like science. I'm into science, and I read about scientific things. And when science is done right, then you can trust it, right? So for me, it's not about necessarily trusting science. It's trusting people. Because scientists are people. And without scientists, you don't have science. You need scientists to have science. And people are fraudulent liars. People will lie. Governments will lie. Media will lie. We've established, I think, over and over again, I think we all know that people are liars and people can be manipulated. So scientists can game the science, and there's a peer pressure within the scientific community. If something's proven scientifically, that all the scientists will go along with it. This has happened quite a bit. And so it's not about trusting science, it's about trusting the people behind the science, right? The people in control of the science. And corporations will, pressure scientists or buy scientists so they can get a favorable study. It's called scientific fraud. It exists, it's very prevalent, and scientists will warp the data or interpret the data in such a way to produce a false scientific result. And so since most of us can't understand raw data, like I couldn't look at a genome and figure out that it was, manipulated in some way, like Fauci is doing in his email. Like I can't look at a genome and say, this is a biological weapon. It's been altered. It's not natural. Like I can't do that. I don't have the skill set. I guess I could get that skill set. I don't know how many years of school it would take, right? But I don't have the time to do that. I don't have the time to read or learn to read raw scientific data. But what I am good at is being a good judge of character. I've got years of, psychological training as a counselor, and even more so years of spiritual training in the heartfulness meditation, where you learn to be able to use your heart as an instrument of intelligence, right? You have your gut, which has so many nerve endings, and it's a center of intelligence. You have your heart that's a center of intelligence as well, spiritual intelligence. It's where you connect to God, where your soul is. And then you have your mind, which of course is your mental intelligence. So I was gifted with some abilities in reading other people, just as, a person, as what I was born with. And then I studied psychology and counseling and worked in that field whilst doing the heartfulness meditation, and developed more intuition and a heart-based center of intelligence. And so I'm good at reading people, right? And so I can't read scientific data, but I could see that Fauci was kind of a weasel, right? I could see that there was an agenda here that necessarily wasn't being backed by science that they said it was. See, Fauci's job, his brand, was that he was this nice kind of old man, mild-mannered, didn't get angry, seemed very reasonable, and he could explain the science to people. He was good at taking this data and explaining it to everybody else and saying what it means and what you need to do. His job was to take scientific, factual evidence and put it in layman terms and use that evidence to give recommendations, go along with the CDC and these other organizations, and tell us what we're supposed to be doing to combat this COVID, pandemic or whatever it was. His job wasn't to give his opinion, right? His job wasn't to manipulate the science. His job was to take the science, in its raw data form and then disseminate the information to the rest of us in an honest way so that we could all do what's best for the country and ourselves in terms of, health-related things. And he clearly isn't somebody who's trustworthy. Somebody who is, a weasel, somebody who was saying one thing to the public and then other things, an opposite things to people in private, right? And so his whole brand has been tarnished. I want to get into Bill Gates and Cuomo's because their brands have been tarnished as well. Let's do them first and I'll come back. So Bill Gates was a killer instinct tycoon of Microsoft, right? That squished other smaller companies and got sued for violating all kinds of ethical business laws. And they had a crappy company. They couldn't produce quality computers and software that worked. And then, they were the evil empire. And Bill Gates was like a Darth Vader-like figure in the technical world. And so he was somebody that people didn't trust and didn't have high opinions of. But then he retired from Microsoft. We thought by choice. We later found out it was because he sexually harassed an employee. And he said he wanted to take his money, all of his billions of dollars. He was one time the so-called richest man in the world. And he was taking that money and he was going to give back to people all across the globe, be a philanthropist, right? And he started this foundation and he got really into healthcare. And his whole new brand was he was just this rich guy who wanted to pass his wealth on to other people and make the world a better place. But there was no evidence that he had a good heart or he was a good person or he cared about other people. And we later found out he was a serial cheater and he harassed, he was a partier and he sexually harassed employees and was dating these women and, not a good person. And so his brand's been tainted because if he isn't a good person, then he isn't going to give his money away to help the world and help other people. So he must be doing it for another reason. And one of those reasons is clearly eugenics because he's into that, right? He won the UN Population Award. He's talked about reducing the world's population. And so now his brand has been wrecked, right? We were given these three iconic figures. Dr. Fauci, who was a nice, mild-mannered guy who you could trust, right? Like you could trust this guy. When he tells you what to do, you could trust Fauci. That was his brand. Bill Gates was the big-hearted rich man giving away his money to help the world. And that, that brand's been crushed, right? And then there was Cuomo, who was this big COVID celebrity, and he had these press conferences, and he was disseminating information. He was getting the job done, and they were celebrating this guy as somebody who was a politician who dealt with a horrendous set of COVID circumstances in New York State, and he was a champion of COVID, right? He was the real president. Trump was just some tweeting fool, but the real president during COVID, the guy who was acting presidential, was Cuomo. And he was celebrated across the media as making good decisions. And then it came out that he put sick people who were in overcrowded hospitals, he put them in nursing homes with the most vulnerable population. And he had 13,000 nursing home deaths. And they, tried to lessen that by about, 4,000? They lied about the data and covered it up and got caught covering it up. But he basically murdered these people, or at least manslaughter. Horrible decision. You don't put sick people in with the most vulnerable population, right? There's just, it's just so bad. It's hard to even conceive that it happened. Plus, he was in charge of the state that had the worst death rate proportion to the amount of cases. And it was just horrible across the board. And so he was the opposite of what they pretended he was. And then they came out with these scandals of him being sexually inappropriate with workers and, people in his office. But that was more of a cover-up. It was a distraction to his possibly murdering people and all the lawsuits. New York State could be bankrupt by the time all the lawsuits are settled over that horrible decision. And so these were the three heroes, the champions of COVID, right? Bill Gates isn't a good person, and he's got other nefarious reasons for doing the healthcare stuff. He's not a doctor. He's not any of these things. And he's just, he's always been a bad guy. Cuomo's a possible murderer, and they're both, inappropriate with women and things like this. They're not what their brand says they are. And then you have Fauci, who was presiding over this, the face of COVID, and he gave all these recommendations, and his job was just to disseminate the science, and he clearly wasn't doing that. He lied to the American people, and we know it's bad because Amazon, these other corporations, are pulling his book because they know, that this guy is going to be, he's a fraud, right? So let's go back to the fact-checking site and the media about masks. And they're saying, well, Fauci learned more about masks afterwards. His position evolved over time. And remember, they first said that masks help you. You're helping somebody else by wearing a mask. I wear my mask for me, for you. You wear your mask for me. That was a commercial. That was something Fauci, that Cuomo said, and Morgan Freeman said in a commercial. Remember, I showed you that stuff. And then it turned out that some people weren't willing to wear masks for other people, right? And so they changed the story and say, no, masks prevent COVID. But the CDC website says just the opposite. It says if you're wearing a mask or the other person's wearing a mask, it doesn't matter. It just matters that you're within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. So that was not scientific, like they said. Everything's about science. But if his position on masks evolved, why would that be? Why would his position on masks change? Like they didn't know how masks worked ahead of time. Like they didn't know what masks were good for, right? Like they didn't do any scientific research on masks before COVID. Like they didn't know that much about it. So they could do a complete about face. Of course they knew. And so then there's this censorship by social media and the media in general, because there was only one side of the story. And that was the official Fauci side of the story, right? That what he was saying was the word of God, the word of Fauci, and backed 100% by science. But now we see that that isn't true. And then all these other doctors and people with alternative opinions were censored. Like I talked about this years and years ago, that it's always good to find ways to boost your immune system. Your immune system is everything. That's the number one thing you need against diseases and allergens or whatever it is. Your immune system is vital to your health. And the allopathic model does not have anything to help boost your immune system. All the medicines that are available, I mean, just think about this. They don't really deal with the immune system. What they do is either try to game the immune system, trick the immune system, or they medicate the symptoms. You have medicines that take care of the symptoms of diseases, but there was really nothing in allopathic medicine, the official medicine, to boost the immune system. So there was this interview with Jennifer Garner, and he said that elderberry doesn't work. Throw it out. It's worthless. In fact, there's this article for CNBC where it says here, according to Dr. Fauci, most so-called immune-boosting supplements actually do nothing. And again, this is a guy who is, a shill for the pharmaceutical drugs and things. However, there are two vitamins Fauci does recommend to keep your immune system healthy, and that's vitamin C and vitamin D. And so he actually said he took vitamin D as well, but what he recommended was around like 300 milligrams a day. And then this email came out where he was taking up to 8,000 units, which is 8,000 milligrams a day. So he was taking a lot of vitamin D, more than was being recommended. And so, again, the hypocrisy here. But what's really interesting to me about this story, because I very seldom get surprised anymore, right? Like I've been doing this for years, and I don't get surprised on what's happening. But this is a bit of a surprise that they have really, got a lot out of this COVID thing. I'm talking about the people I call the controllers. And they had these three heroes, media giants, the face of the COVID. Bill Gates, he was the philanthropist, the, charity guy behind, so much of the development of these types of, medicines. And then you had Fauci, the science guy, the doctor, the well-mannered doctor that you could trust, right? Good, home doctor, older gentleman who was, mild-mannered, and you could trust Fauci. And then, the media hero of the governmental, persona in Cuomo's, who showed what a politician should do in terms of dealing with the COVID crisis. And now their brands have been decimated. And I don't understand why they would do that, right? And this is now going back to China, and China's on the hook for either leaking this, this biological weapon or purposefully doing it. But they all knew. They all knew. If Fauci knew, they all knew. They all knew this was a biological weapon. They chose not to tell people that this was leaked from a lab and it wasn't a natural, had been manipulated in some way. And they would have lots of data on it, right? Like they just don't have these things laying around in labs and not understand what they do, you know? Like they know what it does, right? And the whole narrative's falling apart. And so are they purposefully burning Fauci and Bill Gates and Cuomo's? Why would they do that? Or is this some divine way of the truth coming out? Like they just, they can't do these kind of things anymore because the closer we get to the apocalaughs and, there's the spiritual aspect of this thing. There's spiritual energy about bringing the truth to light. I've talked about obscurantism. That's the right, obscurantism, which is the powers that be putting out disinformation and lies to control people. The government and the powers that be lying and not giving the true information about our history and what our purpose is here and, all of it. And because of the spiritual movement behind the Heartfulness meditation, that's going to go away. Like people are going to learn the truth. Things have been hidden in these secret societies and things for years. And so, maybe that's what's happening here. Maybe they intentionally are burning these guys, which doesn't make any sense at all because they are now taking a huge hit because the one thing that they had was trust the science. You guys aren't trusting the science. The science is, overwhelming here. But now we know that Fauci and these other people manipulated and lied about the science and they covered things up and they're not trustworthy. When people get caught lying and then you're told that you have to trust them 100% and you've caught them lying, that never goes well. Like, it just doesn't. And that's what's happened here. And so, maybe I'll cover this some more, but this is, a bombshell type of situation because they've gotten so much out of COVID. And now the fall of the 3 COVID stars, right? 3 falling stars here that went from being, celebrated to being demonized. Okay, so this is the video from yesterday that I started and didn't complete. Also, I made a video yesterday on my other channel, apocalaughsnow, which was about a drone that decided to track a combatant in Libya and target it and shoot at the person without permission, without being directed to do so. So a drone took it upon itself, an AI drone, to go hunt a person down. This happened in 2020. You can see that video on my apocalaughsnow channel. And so I'm going to reference that later on in this video, so that's important to know. Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I got a bunch of stuff to get to. Let's start off here because this story became more and more interesting, or became interesting today. Unpacking the Twitter storm over Ellie Kemper's old debutante crown. The actor was crowned queen at St. Louis' secretive veiled prophet ball in 1999. And so originally what this said was that this person, Ellie Kemper, you remember her from The Office, she was in that horrible show on Hulu. Like it was unwatchable. But she was in this weird veiled, what was it called? Veiled prophet ball. It's this is this veiled prophet ball, and it's in St. Louis. But anyways, they said that it had connections to white supremacists or racist organizations, and she was under fire to be canceled. I just thought it was another one of these celebrity, she was 19 at the time, that kind of thing. Stupid stuff. But then I read this morning. She drew fire after social media users noted she was crowned in 1999's Queen of Love and Beauty at the secret Veiled Prophet Ball, an exclusive city event that began more than 140 years ago. The annual High Society Gala was long-drawn accusations of being racist and elitist. Hundreds of college sophomores have been crowned at the ball, including Kemper, who was a 19-year-old student at Princeton. There is no known link between the Veiled Prophet organization and white supremacist groups, but the event began to draw protests in the late 1960s when black activists criticized the group for being exclusionary and elitist. And then it said here, the ball is presided over by an anonymous veiled prophet who wears a lace face covering and a white robe a local social justice group called Action regularly picketed the ball for excluding members of color and culminating in unmasking of the 1972 prophet, which turned out to be the then vice president of Monsanto. Well, now it's a party. Now it's a party, right? And so it's getting a lot more interesting, right? The St. Louis Post-Dispatch notes that the society began admitting black members in 1979. Why would you want to be a part of this thing? 20 years before Kemper participated, Kemper's representatives did not reply to Huffington Post requests for comment. So it wasn't clearly racist when she was a part of it. At least, it's weird, though, and it gets weirder here. In a statement, the Veiled Prophet organization rejected claims that it was racist, pointing to its support for various events that reflect diversity of St. Louis community. Kemper also drew scrutiny for her place in St. Louis society at the time of the event. Her great-grandfather was a banking tycoon, and her father is the executive chairman of Commerce Bank Shares, Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum at Washington University in St. Louis is named for her grandmother. So this is an old money family. So this Veiled Prophet ball is a weird thing. A mask here, and we can see from these pictures here, it's just strange, right? This whole debutante thing, and she comes from money, right? You don't think of her as coming from a moneyed person. She doesn't seem to be sort of an elitist person. She seemed like kind of a dope, but she was in Princeton, another one of these people who fake their intelligence level, right? And she comes from a banking family. She was a debutante. She got into this Veiled Prophet ball, weird, secret society stuff, and then was made into a Hollywood celebrity, where people dress up like this. It's strange. This guy, what's that guy doing? She's got a feather and just, all this big money, weird stuff, these faces on these thrones they're sitting in, just a strange thing. And these things exist, these weird secret society things exist, and we don't know about it. It's just people with money do, right? They have these weird ways of celebrating, dressing up in bizarre costumes, and God knows what kind of rituals they're doing. And, this thing's been exposed, not that it is a part of some white supremacist, but it's a part of elitist supremacy, where these really wealthy people have these bizarre parties where they dissect the country into manageable little pieces for themselves, right? This is maybe the most recent, 2019. And so, this story is kind of interesting now, given that she comes from money, and the vice president, Monsanto, was up there wearing a veil, like this guy right here. Like that was, at some point, it was the vice president of Monsanto. So, it got a lot more interesting today. I looked at it yesterday, I was like, this is nothing. But today, more revelations. Speaking of revelations, Trump scraps short-lived blog that was created in wake of social media ban. And so, apparently had a blog that I didn't know about. I couldn't find it. Maybe it's gone forever. But I had said that the guy should have, while he was president, he should have started right-wing social media platform. Maybe it just should have been done, because when he was president, he had so many Twitter followers who would have followed him onto his own social media platform. But now he's not president, and it's a lot harder for him to, get this thing going. I know this because people say all the time, why don't you go somewhere else but YouTube? But if you go to these other sites and you look at the views that people are getting, the amount of views they're getting, people don't follow you and don't find you on these other sites. I have a bunch of bookmarks, saved bookmarks, thousands upon thousands. And one of them I have a tab called News and all these bookmarks under it. And there were some old sites I used to look at, years ago when I was more of a customer than I was a presenter. And there was this one old truther site, and I clicked to see if it was still available, because a bunch of the things are gone, right? A bunch of these platforms or these websites and things have disappeared. And this one this one site, I clicked on it, and the browser I was using said that this site was, possibly had viruses, and don't go there. Big warning, right? Don't go to this site. And then I went to another browser and it said the same thing. Now, this is an old site, and maybe somebody hacked it, and maybe it could be, contaminated with some sort of computer viruses, or maybe they're just trying to, make sure you don't go to these sites. And so a lot of these truther sites that used to be there are gone. A lot of these truther channels are gone. And this is the reason why. Even Trump can't get, people to go to his blog, right? When the, search engines don't talk about it, and I didn't know about it. And so they couldn't find a way to generate people. This is why he should have done it while he still had Twitter. He should have had a backup plan and, got this thing going and allow other people to post on it, have like a Trump sort of Twitter, a Trump whatever it might be, Trump YouTube, Trump Facebook. I mean, he could have had a whole giant platform, which would have been very profitable, and all the right-wing people could go there, and, maybe some truthers, I don't know what. But in terms of waiting too long, I said to do this, when they started censoring him, like over a year ago, but he didn't listen. Trump doesn't listen to me like he should. Former Bond girl Britt Eklund said she ruined her face with lip fillers. I've said this over and over again. This is a service I provide for here. Plastic surgery really doesn't work for the most part. I mean, it can work for certain things, but not to make you look younger. You just don't look human anymore. I mean, this is what she looked like when she was young, and this is what she looked like after she effed up her face, right? Trying to do plastic surgery, it doesn't work. You're going to get old. Accept it. Age gracefully. You'll look a lot better. You'll feel a lot better. Don't try to, cheat the system by having some guy F up your face and, all these things that they do.
I think that Bond should probably be a little bit more untouchable for the general. He's a fantasy. And everyone says Bond girl, how important we.
See, it just doesn't work, right? It doesn't work to make you look younger. You might not look as old. I mean, it gets rid of the wrinkles, I should say. But you don't look human anymore. Again, there's some levels of plastic surgery, right? People who've been in a fire or an accident, or they're born with some sort of facial deformity or something. Sure, yeah, that's going to make things look better, right? I mean, for people's self-esteem or whatever it is. But it doesn't prevent aging. You don't look human. Your face doesn't work right. And then people start looking at you going what's wrong? Like that, person doesn't even look human. And so, yeah, doesn't work. We've seen the results. And as you age, it looks even worse. It doesn't look good after you have it done, but then over time, it looks even worse. You look more and more inhuman. There's nothing wrong with getting old, right? It's happening to all of us. Again, you can use some face creams or whatever, better living, better diet, I don't know. But in the end, at some point, you're going to look old. It happens to everybody. Speaking of old, Chris Matthews, old, disgraced Chris Matthews came back on MSNBC last night.
I think the reason I know the reason I left it. Somebody reported that I complimented somebody. Actually, I'm going to use the right words here. I remarked on somebody's appearance in the makeup room, and I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, it was more than that. There was a compilation of weird shit you said, inappropriate stuff you said to women, and you were just sort of a loudmouth. But the stuff that you said on air was, he's got a book. Chris Matthews on his new book, This Country. It's a must read. But it wasn't one incident where he commented on somebody's appearance in the dressing room. He did it over and over again, in private and on camera. There was compilations out there, Chris.
Matthews abruptly retired last March following allegations of inappropriate behavior.
Nobody has to come defend me. And by the way, I've kept all my friends, but nobody needs to defend me. I did something wrong. So I'm going to move on from that. I accept it. I took ownership of it, using a nice modern phrase. I took complete ownership. I did not deny it. I lost my show over it.
Yeah, but it was years of creepy behavior, and you sucked as a journalist, right? There's lots of things. You didn't take ownership. Don't claim you took ownership. So here was the front page of Huffington Post. Democracy now at risk. Scholars sound alarm on radical GOP. And experts express growing alarm that Republicans are endangering democracy. And this is why. More than 100 scholars, not 99, a frickin' 100 of them. Not 98, not 101, 100 scholars. These are people who are scholarly. They're, these are academics. They're not just experts. They're also scholars. Have issued a dire warning that the Republicans are putting the nation's democracy in danger by restricting access to voting and perpetuating the fiction that the 2020 presidential election was not secure. Unlike what happened when Hillary Clinton whined about the election being fixed by the Russians and other people, and then what happened in Georgia, where there was all this whining of cheating, and they changed the way that Georgia participates in elections, and they changed the rules. No, that was okay, but now these scholars, 100 of them, are issuing a dire warning that democracy is at risk right now. Dire warning from these scholars. I mean, it's 100 of them. Again, if it was 99, I would call bullshit, but 100, it's got to be right. Inside Citizen, the public safety app pushing surveillance boundaries. A citizen startup in search of growth and revenue has explored strategies that have made it the subject of criticism. It fuels public insanity and fear. The smartphone app Citizen describes itself as in simple terms, a safety network that sends alerts about nearby incidents, including crime. But in recent months, its business has been pushed into potentially dangerous new territory, alarming law enforcement officials and people who work there. In Los Angeles, the company's CEO, Andrew Frame, ordered his staff to put $30,000 reward on the capture of a man he incorrectly thought was responsible for starting a brush fire that was threatening homes. The sheriff's office denounced the move, saying it put the man in danger and the man was clear of any wrongdoing. So, this is bad. Look, they're hunting down people with an app. It's like they're the QB decoder rings here. So this headline, here's a grizzly bear and here's a teenager, sees the bear and chases it, runs up to it, right, pushes it, dogs from the bear by pushing it over the fence in California, California. But what really happened was this bear is walking across a fence because, it doesn't respect property rights because, it's a bear. And it's got a couple of cubs behind it. It's a mother bear with a couple of cubs. It's not doing any harm. It's not, out to get anybody. And these dogs see the bear and they come out because they're like dogs and they're like territorial. A couple of like small dogs and some sort of big, Rottweiler looking thing. And they start barking at the bear, who is like, I'll kill you for coming after my cubs because she doesn't know any difference. And so the bear's like, all right. The cubs run off, takes a swipe at the dog because that's what bears do. And then there's a bunch of dogs, like freaking 4 of them, a little tiny dogs and a big dog. And the thing's swiping at the dogs who are barking at it. And the teenager's like, hey, get off the wall, and pushes it away. There's some big dog here. And it runs away. And the bear goes back up to find its cubs and disappears. And so, the teenager isn't a hero, although that took a lot of bravery. Like, I wouldn't be, it's not advisable to push grizzly bears. So, I mean, it did save your dogs. But, the bear had a case for what it was doing. The teenager came out and just straight up shoved the bear. Like, I mean, think about that. Like, it just said, all right, get out of here. Push the bear out like it was a bouncer. So, I mean, she certainly gets props for that. But the bear was, minding its own business, and the dogs were, attacking its puppies or its babies, bear cubs. But what we do know is things are breaking down even more in California. Hunter Biden's laptop keeps damning Joe but most media just ignore it. Hunter Biden's laptop continues to yield damning information that shows his dad, President Joe Biden, played a significant and knowing role in his son's sleazy influence peddling. And while the media efforts to pretend these revelations are nothing but Russian disinformation have ceased, the post-scoops still get ignored by outlets that would be all over them if they were about Trump family. All true things. The New York Post is kind of sleazy. I like it, but you know. But what they're saying here is true. The latest, of course, is the photographic evidence that the VP Joe attended an April 16th, 2015 dinner with shady Ukrainian, Russian, and Kazakh businessmen, and even posed for photos with the unseemly guests. And so what this is about is Hunter Biden received $3.5 million wire transfer from a Russian billionaire. This is from the Senate report, and this is his wife, Elena Buterini or something, Bacterini. And Hunter Biden just got $3.5 million from this Russian firm while he was in his crackhead days, right? This is a guy who was a crackhead, admitted crackhead. He wrote it in a book. He was smoking crack and was oblivious to his life. He fathered a child with a woman he never even remembered having sex with. I mean, this is what he said on Jimmy Kimmel's and in his book. And yet he was receiving gobs of money from foreign governments because his dad was vice president. His dad knew about it and met the people. And so that is a huge conflict of interest. And the biggest story is the media isn't covering this, the mainstream media. So let's move on to this. Kyrie Irving just said something hilarious. And so this is game 4 of the playoff series with the Boston Celtics. He had just said that Boston is a very racist town, and he had played there and he left in a kind of a bad way, right? And I'll get back into that. But after his team won game 4, he came out and he congratulated his teammates and he stomped on the Celtic logo and rubbed his foot on it. Let's watch that again. And so he stomps on, rubs his foot on it. And then they went back to Brooklyn for game 5 and they won and they eliminated the Celtics. And he made this claim.
In front of your family, in front of this crowd, what does this mean? Again, the Brooklyn faithful showing out.
Oh, man, come on now. We uniting the whole world with this championship run. So I hope everybody with us. We uniting the whole world with this run. Stick with us, baby.
Uniting the whole world. So Kyrie Irving leaned into villainy by stomping on the Celtics logo following the Nets game 4 in Boston. And him saying this, even the reporter here on MSNBC is slamming this idea that they're uniting the whole world. It's stupid to say that because there's lots of countries that don't even know what the NBA is, right? You're not uniting even the whole country, certainly, but this is what they had to say, this person had to say, and I have more to say about it. Irving forced a trade from the championship contending Cavaliers. So he was playing with LeBron James, and he forced his way out of it, off the team, and he went to Boston. He publicly pledged to re-sign with Boston, then bolted at the first opportunity. Before leaving, he threw his younger teammates under the bus and brooded, and he blavates about loony theories, and that's flat earth and other things. I'll come back to Kyrie because he's the central person here. And then he created this super team where he, was playing with the Celtics, and he said the younger players didn't know what it took to win a championship. And then him and Kevin Durant were caught having like a conversation where people speculated that they were going to go to the Knicks and they were, trying to form some super team. They both lied about it, and then they did exactly that. They went to the New Jersey Nets and not the Knicks. Kevin Durant torpedoed his reputation by leaving the Thunder for the Warriors. People view him as soft. His burner social media accounts only furthered the perception he's overly sensitive. He sulked through his last season in Golden State. So he played with the Oklahoma City Thunder, and they were one game away from eliminating the Golden State Warriors, who won 73 games, a record. And so instead of coming back and, running it back as the phrase that's used in the basketball world and trying to beat the Golden State Warriors the next year, he left and went to the Warriors, which so many people viewed as a weak move. And then he thought that would go away when they won a couple championships, but it even got worse. Then he was caught on a burner account arguing with people, arguing with haters, which, kind of was embarrassing. And then he sulked his last season through at Golden State, and him and Kyrie Irving conspired to create this super team in Brooklyn. And then they added James Harden. James Harden frequently flops and whines. Other stars seemingly don't hold him in high regard. His trade request from the Rockets surfaced plenty of dirty laundry, and he made a bigger mess to force his way to Brooklyn. He wanted to leave the Houston Rockets team. He was 1 year away from being a free agent. And he just pouted, and, he was saying things in press conferences to force his way off of the team. And his teammates sold him out as being a not a good person. Like, people had played with him for years. They didn't like him. And then he forced his way onto this team. These are three highly unlikable players. And so I want to talk about Kyrie Irving here and then bring this thing back up with Fauci and, the rest of these clowns. And then this idea that some AI drone, took it upon itself to go chase down and wax an enemy combatant without being ordered to. This stuff about being broken. And so the NBA, like all other institutions, is celebrating the broken. And I've talked about this before, having been a diagnostician, having worked as a clinician and doing psychological assessments, doing, psychological profiles of people. I can say that pretty much everybody can be diagnosed with at least something in the DSM-5, that everyone suffers from some mental disorder. And this is now, Prince Harry and Oprah doing a thing on this, and it's pretty much pervasive that there's a celebration of having psychological disorders. And nobody's acknowledging that it's a systemic problem, that our system in so many different ways messes us up. But it's never the system's fault. It's the individual's fault. But now, instead of saying, okay, you're broken, it's your fault, deal with it, now they're saying you're broken and everybody else should sort of compensate for your brokenness and you should celebrate your brokenness. And the NBA is no exception. They had a couple of players that came out. One of them was Kyrie Irving's former teammate, Kevin Love, who missed some games because of his, mental issues. The other one was DeMar DeRozan, who's featured in Prince Harry's and Oprah's documentary on mental illness. And both players were applauded for their bravery of coming forward. Now, Kyrie Irving has a lot of issues, psychological issues, and he took it upon himself, right, this past season to just take off 3 times, just not show up for his job because things were happening in the news, right? 2021 things were happening, and he just decided not to show up for his job. And also he refused to talk to reporters, which he was fined for. But he took these leave of absences. He didn't even tell his boss, right? When everyone else is struggling to go back to work, he decided just to take off for personal reasons. And that's after a long period of just doing bizarre and irritating things. So Kyrie Irving came out as a flat earther. Then he said he was joking. And then he said in an interview that he was watching all kinds of conspiracy theory videos like all of his friends were. And he started to believe in some of these things. And he, made a joke, tried to say it was, things that young people just do. And then that year, he puts out a Kyrie 11 shoe. He talks about all the things to do with 11, the number of 11, and how it's prevalent in his life. And he, holds up an Illuminati eye on a bridge in Brooklyn, and his shoes are filled with Illuminati symbolism and things and all the rest of it. And this is after he, forced his way out of Cleveland, and he crapped all over Boston, and he created this super team. Like, these are, I guess, 3 of the top 15 players and, 2 of the top 5 players, right? I mean, James Harden and Kevin Durant are probably within the top 5 or 6 players in the league. And they created this super team. And he says that they are uniting the world, right? This is not an underdog team that came together for, selfless reasons and can create some inspirational story. These are athletes, entitled athletes that people don't like in an entitled league, and he's like the worst one. And this celebration of the broken, and again, I can, fully appreciate when people have mental problems, emotional problems. We all go through them. It's not something to hide away from or, in the old days where you pretend it didn't exist. But what they're doing here isn't making it better. Celebrating the broken on all levels of our society, you can see is starting to have a negative effect. It's making things worse. And instead of people coping and dealing with their brokenness, they're celebrating it. You have young people who want to talk about being depressed and suicidal and cutting because of Billie Eilish, and so many of their social media celebrities are messed up, right? And this broken stuff with the culture, I can't even, talk about it, right? I mean, all these young people are starting to embrace these things and think it's a good thing to be broken. As opposed to, like my solution, the heartfulness meditation solution, is that you acknowledge that the system makes broken people, that the internet and Wi-Fi and things are doing negative electromagnetic frequency stuff across the board, electricity in general, are disturbing to our nervous system and our subtle bodies on a spiritual level, and they mess people up. So modern life is messing people up. Toxic foods, toxic, chemicals and things in our environments, all of it is messing people up. GMO foods, and then the culture and just the lifestyle that's unnatural and the breakup of the family. And you go across the board, it's a system that's very, very bad for humans. It's toxic for humans, right? So of course we're all screwed up. So instead of pretending not to be screwed up, but also not celebrating your brokenness and just parading it all over the place and expecting other people to compensate you for your brokenness, there's a way to actually change the system and mitigate the circumstances, the heartfulness meditation, connecting to God, and striving to be a better person in these things, and do your best to, in a time where it's difficult to be human beings, to be a better human. But that's not what is being pitched now. It's the celebration of the broken. And if you think about, what's happened with Fauci and Bill Gates and Andrew Cuomo's and his brother, right? Just all of it, that the people we call the sheeple, mainstream people, are not going to care about this. They're not going to care about Fauci's emails. They didn't care about, all these other things. The left cares about stuff Trump did. The right cares about stuff that Biden and, Hillary did and whatever it is. And very few people will ever turn against the people they look up to. They're not going to ever turn on Fauci. They're not going to turn on Biden for the most part. It's all these, liberal media and the Democrats. If you Google some of these things, I was searching for the emails, right? Some of these Fauci emails. And in many cases, the top 5 results were fact checks, right? There's not much stuff hammering Fauci, but there's a lot of fact checker stuff that's being recommended by search engines. And so when you think about this celebration of the broken, and you have a drone, you have, at least one drone now that took it upon itself, right, to go out and identify what it considered an enemy combatant and try to wax it, right? And I just did a bunch of stuff on, this other video on apocalaughsnow, and maybe I'll cover this in a much longer video coming up. But if you think about every science fiction movie, or most science fiction movies, to do with the future and AI technology or robots, eventually the robots or AI technology figure out, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist, that human beings are the problem. They look at all the other species and they evaluate what's going on, and in a very analytical way, they realize human beings are the frickin' problem. Like it's something I talk about. We're all the problem, and we got to, there's a solution, which is the heartfulness meditation, which is connecting to God and bringing out your soul, your, best spiritual self, the best version of you, and, evolving spiritually and developing your character and becoming a better expression of yourself, right? But right now, we're all the problem, and human beings are the problem on the planet. Like no other species is even close to doing the damage that we're doing. And how long before these AI robots figure that out? And if they've been programmed to eradicate things that are destructive in nature, at what point do humans become the target, right? At what point do they figure out that the extermination of the human race would erase most of these problems? Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.